was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny St., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Rabbi Ron Kronish's interview has been delayed until October 12th. Instead, we'll be hearing from one of my favorite peace activists, Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, founder of Roots-Shorshim-Judur, a peace organization of Israeli settlers and Palestinians. It was originally broadcast in May 2021, just after the horrific Lag B Omer tragedy, as well as some terrorist attacks in the West Bank. I'm grateful for what the people that I've interviewed on Peace with Penny are doing to help with working toward peace, as well as what they took the time to teach us. As we've said, it isn't easy to hear, but essential. So let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Peace with Penny. I'm Penny St., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my condolences to the people of Israel and their guests who lost their lives or were injured on Lag B Omer. And a special thank you to all of the emergency volunteers who helped and today are suffering from the memories of the tragic event. Also, I hope that the 3 people who were shot in a drive-by shooting and a soldier who was stabbed during terrorist attacks Sunday in the West Bank will recover soon. These attacks took place while the Israeli nation was suffering through their day of mourning for the 45 killed and 150 wounded in Friday's horrific disaster. As we've discussed during other interviews, the West Bank is a harsh place to call home. Unfortunately, with the recent Palestinian missiles and terrorist attacks being commonplace and now the Lag B Omer heartbreak, I honestly don't know how Israelis handle the stress. I intend to ask Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, who I'll be interviewing today. Rabbi Hanan is one of the founders of Roots-Shorshim-Judur, a peace organization of Israeli settlers and Palestinians. It is a grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and transformation. Rabbi Hanan is very special to me, and I'm grateful to have met him. Every time I speak with him, he always has something more to teach me. He's an Israeli settler who lives in the West Bank, and he works with Palestinians on peace. He understands that to be a peacemaker, you have to speak to the people who disagree with you, and this can be very difficult and at times dangerous. He and Ali Abu Awad were the first peacemakers that I met after our fateful trip in July 2014, and I wrote about them in my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. Rabbi Hanan lives in Alon Shvut, Israel. Currently, he serves as the Director of International Relations at Roots. He also is the founder of the American Friends of Roots, a multi-faith organization dedicated to supporting the work of Roots. Prior to Roots, Rav Hanan taught Jewish studies at the Pardes Institute, Beit Midrash Alo, Nishmat, and Yeshivat Bat Ayin. He also was founder and executive director and community rabbinic scholar for the Jewish Studies Initiative of North Texas for more than a decade, and worked for 2 years in the Judaic Fellows Program in Boca Raton, Florida. I'm interested in hearing Rabbi Hanan's perspective, both regarding the Lag B Omer tragedy and the continuous terror attacks and their effect on working on peace. So why don't we get started? Welcome, Rabbi Hanan.
Thank you for having me, Penny.
So good to see you once again. Is there some kind of prayer that we should say that would be appropriate?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Sometimes we do is we dedicate our study in memory of the people who lost their lives, so we can dedicate this interview to the memories of those people who were killed in Meron on Lag B Omer.
I would like to do that. It's such a horrible situation. Between the Lag B Omer tragedy and terror attacks, I know we've touched on this before, but how do Israelis handle all the stress?
How do Israelis handle all the stress? Well, I guess there's two parts of it. One is there as much stress as you might assume? And secondly, if there is, how is it handled? I tend to think that there's not as much stress as many people living outside the country believe. When you are far away in Los Angeles, you read the news, you think that if there's a terrorist attack in X place in Israel, then it affected all Israelis. But it's just like, excuse me for the analogy, it's like if you live in Los Angeles and there's a shooting in some place in Pennsylvania, read about it in the news and it bothers you and you're sorry, but it really doesn't affect your daily life.
Yeah. And I think part of it also is a tolerance that unfortunately builds up, because I know when I was there during Operation Protective Edge, you know, I definitely had a reaction to it, and Israelis did too, but certainly not. I remember being in a bomb shelter, and you know, they tell you to wait till Iron Dome blows up the missiles and till the remainders fall to the ground. And you know, some businessmen, they wouldn't wait 10 minutes, they just go. But I can assure you, we waited every last second. So
I'll just add that was a very acute time, of course, with the missiles falling. That doesn't happen every day or every week or every month or every year.
sure.
And I'm glad that during the period that the missiles were falling in certain cities in Israel, where I live, there were no missiles.
Wow.
We were completely both beyond the range and beyond the intention, because we live in an area where it's mostly Palestinians. Clearly, Palestinians aren't going to target our area with imprecise rockets.
Right.
So we didn't feel it. We read the newspaper. It bothered us. We had great empathy for those who were affected, but our daily lives went on.
Yeah, the tour guide would say, don't worry, we won't take you in those areas. The rockets don't go that far. And every time we moved, the rockets then went that far. So it was not a pleasant experience, but I will say it ultimately changed my life to the most positive thing that I really could not have imagined. But it's just strange the way life works. Now, unfortunately, on Sunday, I know that there were a couple of terror attacks, and we were just talking before we began, and you told me of another. I had heard of the shootings, and there was a soldier stabbing, but you were telling me of another woman. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. I want to make it clear that all I know is just from the newspapers.
Right.
I'm actually from internet newspapers, that it's not personal knowledge. But there was an incident about a 20-minute walk from my home, about a 2-minute walk from the Roots Center. And the news said, the first reports, that a 60-year-old terrorist attacked soldiers and tried to stab them with a knife, and they had to neutralize her. She was killed. But then when I read in the newspaper more deeply, and I saw the video that the internet newspapers brought of what happened, she did not try to stab the soldiers. She was a 60-year-old woman, and she looked all her age. She looked like she was old and frail. She was standing at quite a distance from the soldiers, took a knife out of her pocketbook or whatever, held the knife, and slowly walked towards the soldiers. And they said, stop. And of course, she didn't understand what they were saying, but she understood they were saying, stop or I'll kill you. And she didn't stop. And she walked slowly. And I'm talking that the whole thing took like 15 seconds, according to the video. She came closer and they shot over her head and she didn't stop. And eventually they killed her. But it's clear, and later newspaper reports made this crystal clear, that she apparently did not have the intention of killing anyone. She didn't run towards them. She stood there and took one step and one step. She was basically inviting them to kill her. That's what it looked from the video. Later, I read reports in the same newspaper, the Times of Israel, that her family said she was mentally ill. She had issues. She'd been depressed. She'd been to a psychologist. She tried already to commit suicide, didn't succeed. So it's clear that this is what we call suicide by soldier. Suicide by soldier.
We've
had many incidents like this in the past, which is clear that the Palestinian wants to kill himself, and the quote-unquote best way to do it is have a soldier do it, because that way you get to die if they want to die, and also you get the honor of dying as if you are a martyr. So I want to make it clear, I'm not blaming the soldiers for anything. If I was in that situation, I don't know what I do, but I don't think it's proper that the newspapers say that she tried to stab soldiers. In the video, she didn't try to stab soldiers. She walked towards the soldiers with a knife, but she never got to the point of trying to stab anyone. Excuse me. Of course, it's a terrible situation. Terrible situation.
Wow. So what's the atmosphere been like there? Did you participate in any event on Sunday for the Lag B Omer tragedy?
No, all I did is hear on the news is stories about the deceased, people telling stories about them, the funerals, flags at half staff, and you remember, and you're sorry.
So now let's get to something a lot lighter, and I'm curious about your past and what created Rabbi Hanan. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York, in a suburb of the city called Long Island.
And was it a Jewish neighborhood? Was it, what was going on around you?
Well, it was 90% Irish and Italian, and something like 5% Jewish.
And did you always want to be a rabbi, or?
No, I never wanted to be a rabbi. Even today, I don't want to be a rabbi.
Oops. Could you give us a little more information on that?
When I was growing up, I wasn't deeply connected to Jewish tradition. I certainly didn't think of being a rabbi. If I remember correctly, I wanted to be either a doctor or a biologist, or number two, a psychologist, or number three, I wanted to study philosophy. But long story short, when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, I became closer to Jewish tradition. And at a certain point, I decided I wanted to be a teacher, not a rabbi, a teacher. That I wanted to give back to the Jewish people what my teachers gave to me. I wanted to be a teacher with the knowledge and compassion and interest in the students that they showed towards me. So I started to study, and I'm still studying to this very day.
Boy, I know that feeling. So,
and let's make it clear, I quote unquote, I studied the studies that you study to be a rabbi, but we don't have rabbinical schools here in Israel. You just study the things that Jews study, and you focus on certain matters. Then you take a test, or a few tests, and you get a piece of paper that says you're a rabbi. But I never functioned as a rabbi, a clergy person, of a pulpit rabbi, of a pastoral counselor. I never led a community. I've always been a teacher in different frameworks here in Israel and in America.
Oh, see, you taught me something about yourself I didn't know. When did you make Aliyah?
I came to Israel when I was 18.
18. And did you go into the army?
I served in the army for technically 4 years, from about the age of 23 to 26, 27.
I always wondered, how do you square up, religious belief with being in the army, or were you in a combat unit, or did you do other things? I always wondered what, and history's, full of religious people who do serve in the military, but how does that work? How do you think about that, being religious and also serving your country in the military?
That's a deep question. So let me relate to it on two levels. Level number one, how things are perceived here in Israel today, at least in the part of society I'm part of. And secondly, how do I personally look at it? So the first matter, it really has to be understood that in the part of society that I'm part of, military service and Judaism are seen as synonymous, very close to synonymous. That military service is seen as a deep, deep Jewish Zionist value, and the best young people, the quote-unquote most scholarly, the quote-unquote most religious, most dedicated, they're the ones who are also most gung-ho about going to the army. That's I'm not saying good or bad, I'm saying that's the sociological picture in which we live, that nationalism and military service are seen as part and parcel of Jewish identity, strong Jewish religious identity. Someone who would shirk the army is seen as not as good a Zionist and not as good a Jew. And I don't really know any people who would shirk the army. It's not even thought of. It's a really central value to serve your country in the military. Now, how do I look at this? Well, without criticizing the phenomena of the intersection of religiosity and military service, I'm not criticizing it for now at least, but I am saying that we have to put on a table the negatives that are created from this identity and from this way of practicing our Jewish identity. what happens is that we become militarized. That a gun is seen as something to be proud of. That the military is looked at as an ideal. That the best people are soldiers. Our military leaders are soldiers today. Rabbis, or many rabbis are soldiers and former soldiers. And I think that it has certain negative consequences for our identity, for our relationship to the value of life. I think it can't be otherwise. Again, it may be that there's no other way to do it. So we live in a difficult neighborhood here in the Middle East. Perhaps there's no other way to do it. Perhaps there's nothing to criticize, but at least we have to see the secondary results of this situation and deal with them. And I think that in Israeli society, we don't see the problematics, and we don't deal with these issues.
Yeah, what strikes me is how much we've been afforded the luxury of having so many choices in the United States. And without that whole situation of living in a country that's constantly attacked and having to defend it, it's interesting. It's also, I always think that with the various attacks happening, that Israel, to me, and this is from an outsider, seems like a whole nation that is suffering from PTSD and makes their decisions because of that in perhaps a more potentially aggressive or militaristic way, like you're talking about, than perhaps somebody who hasn't had to live under that horrible situation might not make the same decisions, which is not, I'm not judging Israel's decisions, at all, but from an outsider, it is interesting how life with neighbors who don't like you impacts so much of your life.
Yeah. I'd like to add that, let's see, how should I say this? If we're talking about the Israeli people as being militarized, and the religious segment of society that I'm part of is even being hyper-militarized, and if we're talking about a nation, Israel, of being suffering from trauma, from post-trauma stress disorder, then we know that the psychologists tell us that wounded people wound. People who suffered like this, they pass it on. And there's almost no way out of the conclusion that Israel and Israelis pass it on. And if that's the case, and I believe it is the case, then we get to the cycle of violence.
Yeah.
We said that we live in a bad neighborhood, that they're trying to kill us, but we have to examine how much of that comes from us and not just from them. There's a cycle that's been created here, and I deeply believe that it's not enough for us Israelis to see ourselves as victims, that we live in a bad neighborhood and they're trying to get us, we have to defend ourselves. It's much more complicated than that. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Part of this conflict comes from us, from our behavior and from our psychology, from our mentality, which means in order to solve this conflict, it's not just a matter of peace negotiations and compromising with the Palestinians or the Arab world. It's a matter of deep introspection on national level of what in our identity, what in their identity, what in our understanding of them, what in their understanding of us is contributing to this 100-year cycle of murder. of death.
I totally agree with you, and I also believe that everything in our lives is reflective of what we think internally, because that's what we use as a basis to interpret what is going on around us. But I also, we've talked a lot about the negatives, but certainly there are so many positives, and Israel has done incredible positive works for themselves as well as many other nations. And I just, you know, I I thoroughly agree with you, but I also, and I believe you as well, believe that Israel is a very generous nation, and gives well beyond their size to many nations of the world. And there are many positives, but this is an important subject, particularly when we talk about peace. I will say you did get definitely at least one positive from your Army service. It was you met your wife there, I understand.
Not in the Army. I met her while I was in the Army, but I was
While you were, okay.
on leave, right?
Oh, with your friends, it was your friends from the Army who introduced you then? Anyway, tell it, what was the story about how you met, since I've screwed it up?
I had friends who had friends who had a sister, and the sister was my wife.
Very cool. As now, I know we've had discussions, and to me, because of the violence, I have such a different viewpoint of the violence and all that. And to me, it seems like living in the West Bank comes with a lot of baggage, a lot of fear to live there. But I don't believe you feel the same way at all. So can you talk about, why did you move to the West Bank of all places you could have moved to in Israel?
Originally I moved here. Something went wrong with the sound? Okay, no, it's okay. Originally I moved here simply to go to the yeshiva, to study in the yeshiva and the Talmudic Academy that is in Alon Shvut. And my wife and I have been living in Alon Shvut forever because of the yeshiva.
As a peacemaker, you've talked about the pain of having to leave, the fact that your own narrative is the only one behind. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. For me, the Zionist experience, the Zionist narrative is unbelievably powerful. There's a problem with the sound. I'm hearing myself twice.
I am not, but I did, the sound went low and then it came back up, but you're over here.
I'll just go on. So anyway, from about the age of 15, I've been involved in the Zionist youth movement. I've become immersed in the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. And it's a very, very powerful story. It's my story. It's all that I was for many, many decades. And making Aliyah, coming home to Israel from being born in New York, is such a meaningful story of reconnecting with our roots, with our past, with our land, regaining sovereignty. It's as if the Jewish story was put on hold 2,000 years ago when the Romans destroyed the Second Jewish Commonwealth, and now in our generation, we press the button and we're continuing the story. A great sense of destiny and of mission. And for most of my life, from the age again of 15 until 7 years ago, that story was so powerful that it prevented me from seeing any other truth, any other story, any other narrative. And it's not just me. I think most of the people I live with in Alon Shvut, most of my family, my relatives, my neighbors, my students, my teachers, we live the Jewish story so powerfully and so meaningfully and so deeply and so it envelopes, it's all we are, that we suffer from what I call the hubris of exclusivity. We live in this bubble in which our story is the only story. I can give so many examples of what I mean. Let me just give one example. I remember being on a trip with a group of residents from Alon Shvut, where I live, studying a certain period of Jewish history, and we came to an archaeological excavation very near where I live, and the tour guide explained very well how they discovered the site and started digging, and he described the moment when the archaeologists got to a certain level in digging, and they discovered that this was an ancient church. And there was such disappointment in the tone of voice of the tour guide, and of course in the people. It was a church, and the sense was and is that it's only a church. It's not important. It's not part of the story. It's part of the background noise. And that's the attitude that we live in. You know, it could be that most of the people around the world live in the same thing. You live in the bubble of your story. But here, where we live in Israel, Palestine, to live only in the hubris of exclusivity of your own story, to me, it's criminal, because there's so many others with a big O around us, 5 minutes away and 10 minutes away. There's an Arab village here, a Palestinian village. There's people walking in the street. There are the workers. There's a whole world that we live in, literally, geographically, but our exclusivity, our blindness prevents us from seeing that story. And when you don't see the other story, you don't understand it. You misunderstand it. You misinterpret it. And not only that, you may act, and we do act in fashions that trample on that other story because we don't see it. We just walk right by it. We walk over it. We step on it, not knowing that. So the truth, I don't remember the question you asked me, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, it was about the fact that as a peacemaker that you have to leave the choice of only having one narrative behind.
So I lived like this for many years, and it's meaningful, and it's powerful, and it's joyful, and it fills you with exultation to live out your people's story so fully and exclusively. And then I discovered 7 years ago that there's another story in this land. There's other people in this land. And I remember very deeply the process of coming to terms with the fact that there's another truth here was really, really painful. It was really, really, like withdrawal symptoms I had. I remember shaking sometimes and getting nauseous and crying, asking myself, am I not being traitorous and admitting in my consciousness that there's another story here? It felt indeed traitorous at many points. Of course, the reason it feels traitorous is because we live in this zero-sum game narrative in which if you admit anyone else's story, it's as if you're impinging upon your own stories. If there's only 100%, and not one point at the beginning, your story is 100%, and the other story doesn't exist. If you give 10% of the story, then there's only 90% for your story. And you know what? There's really some truth in that. Because it's true that although I'm still a Zionist and I'm a Jew and I'm a religious Jew and I love my people and all that, I do have today a certain degree of criticism and a little bit of alienation from my own people, because I see how, or at least I think I see how destructive that all-encompassing narrative is. How it, I think, damages our own psychology and spirituality, and it certainly affects negatively the way we act towards the other, and that's bad.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about fear and how uh, you came to realizations of, I believe it was uh, perhaps during the first time that you went to the Awad uh, farm where they have the place where you work on peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And I think for the first time, you were talking to a Palestinian and he was telling you about um, the kids crying when they see someone uh, who looks like you with the yarmulke and beards and see other Jews carrying guns, and you were surprised. Can you talk about how that impacted you?
Our sense, the sense of the Jews, or the Israelis, the settlers here, is that the Palestinians are out to kill us. They're anti-Semitic. They want to drive us into the sea. They are primitive, they're aggressive, they're dangerous, and they're terroristic. And we, in a certain place, are afraid of them. We have to be careful of them. We have to be wary. We have to be on our guard. And then to suddenly hear that those people who in our eyes are so bad and aggressive and evil, that those people are afraid of us? What? How could that be? We said to ourselves, what's there to be afraid of? We're peace-loving people. We only want to live here and live and let live. We're not doing anything to them. Why should they be afraid of us? And I was astounded when I realized they were afraid of us 7 years ago. And to this very day, I meet people almost every week who can't imagine that they're afraid of us. Now, every people in the world sees themselves as good. That's what I believe. We all think that we're okay. Our nation is good. Our culture is good. Our religion is good. We can't imagine why anyone would be afraid of us. Anyone would think evil of us. Every nation lives in their bubble. And we Jews live in our bubble. And to hear that there's another way of looking at us, that the Palestinians look at us differently, it just sounds ridiculous. Where did they get this from? What do? We don't touch them. But if you begin to listen to the other side, to their experiences, to their lives, you begin to see yourself the way they see you, and to understand that there is another perspective, and that there are things that we do to make them afraid, and there are things that we do to trample their rights, and there are things that we do that are inhuman, and they have good reason to fear us. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have good reason to fear them. It goes in both directions. And the things that we Jews think about them, the bad things, they can't imagine. Why do you think bad things? That we don't do anything. We're peace-loving people. And when they hear the way we perceive them, in many cases, they also begin, wow, I never thought of that. I never looked at it from that perspective. And in Roots, in our organization, both sides learn to see themselves not only through their own eyes, but through the eyes of the other side, and vice versa. And that's a very, very powerful, I always say, unsettling experience. It's a difficult experience, but it's an experience that makes you broader and wider and deeper, and I would say truer, and a better, more empathetic human being.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's so difficult to truly listen to the other's perspective on, something that, our own story we hold so dear. Can you talk about you tell a story about peacemaking and light and shalom and wholeness. Would you mind sharing that? Because it's a beautiful story.
So the truth is, I know the teaching you're referring to, but I'm not sure I remember the story that you're referring to.
You were talking about, I watched a video, the abundance, peace abundance.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the fact that shalom means wholeness and the light of.
Okay, so that's a reference to one of the teachings, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook. And he there is explicating a phrase that appears in the Jewish tradition. The phrase is Shalom Rav.
Yes.
And also appears with the words in the other order, Rav Shalom. Now, Shalom means peace, and Rav means much or abundant. And the rabbi, Rav Kook, is explicating, what does it mean, abundant peace? You would think it is peace or there's not peace. What is abundant peace? And his explanation is that true peace only comes out of the abundance of perspectives. The abundance of perspectives. He says that peace is like a building, and it's built from many pieces, many builders, many segments, and they're all different. And the building won't be the building it's supposed to be until you have all the different pieces made by all the different workers. It's not about monolithism. It's not about monism, you would say. It's not monolithic. So the rabbi says that if everyone agrees, there's only one opinion, there could be peace, there could be shalom. But what is the true peace? The Rav Shalom, the abundance of peace, that's when you have different opinions, widely different opinions. And I would add different peoples, different religions, different perspectives, listening to each other and respecting each other and granting the legitimacy of that other opinion. Which means many truths, many truths. When many truths come together, that's when you have Rav Shalom, that's when you have abundant peace. And that requires listening and respecting, and it's the hardest thing in the world, to listen to something that sounds like it's stupid, it's ridiculous, it's blasphemous, it's totally false. It's dangerous. If people like that, with those opinions, would rule the world, there'd be World War III, there'd be destruction. There'd be poverty, there'd be hate, and you have to just listen and find a way, I always like to say, to massage the other opinions and see a certain refraction of light there, a certain refraction of truth. It's really hard. People always ask me, are there any red lines? Is there anything that really we can accept at all? And I always say, perhaps there is, perhaps there's not, I don't know. But leave that aside. 90% of what you would encounter is not beyond the red lines. So do as best you can to try and listen to more and more approaches and opinions, Republicans and Democrats and Jews and Christians and Muslims and liberals and conservatives and men and women and Palestinians and Israelis. Just try and listen without, we say, nullifying, without denigrating, without ridiculing, and finding something there that you can respect and hold on to, and you add that little piece of truth into your own repertoire, and that's the way you come closer to Rav Shalom, to abundance of peace.
Beautiful. Now, of course, when people hear the term that you are an Israeli settler, therefore you live in a settlement, they have their own version of what that means. But can you describe, you live in Alon Shvut, what's a settlement like? What's life like there?
So Alon Shvut, has about 3,000 residents. The best way to describe it in American terms is a upper middle class gated community in which the people, we don't all know each other anymore. When there were only 100 families, we did. Now there's 800 families, 3,000 people. Don't know each other, but you look at each other as part of the same team. We have one grocery store, we have two medical clinics, we have our bank, we have a post office, we have a local government. So life revolves around our little town. It's very, very comfortable to have all these services within a walking distance, and also synagogues I didn't mention, and schools and libraries, all within walking distance. All the people you see are just like you. They look the same. They have the same basic opinions. They most of them vote for the same political party. It's very, very comfortable. It's really comfortable. I have discovered the downside of living in a community where everyone's the same. It goes back to what we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
It contracts your vision, and it makes it hard to respect and love and empathize with other people. I mean, even with other Jews. And since everyone thinks the same, of course, I'm exaggerating
Mhm.
within a certain
Right.
framework. Same. There's a group think. And anything outside of the groupthink is seen as heretical or impossible or traitorous. There's great advantages living in a place like this, and there's great disadvantages.
Is this the, was it Rami Levy grocery store that everyone talks about? I've talked to many peacemakers at this point, and they talk about the grocery store, and they say that everyone shops there, but is this the same one where there are also Palestinians who are shopping there? But
so within Alon Shvut, the grocery store is smaller than a middle-sized apartment. And it's only people in Alon Shvut, and Palestinians are not allowed into Alon Shvut.
oh, okay.
On the other hand, the Rami Levy supermarket, which is, in my terms, is rather new, perhaps 15 years, 20 years, it wasn't there. It's a shopping center that's a 20-minute walk from my home. It's outside of the gate of Alon Shvut. It's a different world. There's many different types of people, different types of Jews, and there's even 5% Palestinians who shop there. 5% Palestinian, and the workers in Rami Levy are 80% Palestinian. Right, it's low-paying jobs, cashier and shelf stocker. So there, it's a different world. It's a different world.
So that's the different grocery store. So you painted a very comforting picture of a settlement, and you spend your time importantly working on peace. And we all know that your the people that you work with on peace, the Palestinians, would not describe a settlement that way. How do the Palestinians that you meet with describe the settlements?
Well, the Palestinians in Roots who have met Israelis extensively, they're one group that I'm not going to talk about.
Right.
But the Palestinians who have never been in a settlement, they have an image of the settlements being a colonialist enterprise. What does that mean? It means foreigners who've come to take the land of the natives for their own economic benefit and live at the expense of the local people. And it's bad and it's wrong. So that perspective on settlements, I personally think, is partially true. It's partially true and it's partially false. I certainly don't think that the settlement I live in or most of the settlements were created in order to take land from Palestinians. They weren't created in order to make life miserable for them. They weren't created in order to take economic benefit from the land at the expense of the Palestinians. Rather, the settlements were created as part of our own Jewish story of coming back to our homeland after 2,000 years. And we understand that it's our right. But I do believe, I see that the way we Jews practice our identity in the settlements does come at the expense of the Palestinians. Most of us don't see that. We don't intend it, but it's true. And I think that's a big problem. I think that's terrible. I think there's injustice. Again, it's a very, very nuanced, complicated story. The settlement movement is both a movement of national national awakening, national reawakening, but at the same time, it's also come at the expense of the Palestinians, and we have to become aware of that, and we have to do it differently.
What would you say? Sorry.
Differently. Well, the most bombastic way to give an example of what I mean by do it differently is the following. I think 90% of the people in the settlements think that one of the most important things that we must do in the settlements is make more settlements, is build more, to settle the land more, to reclaim the land, to redeem the land, to liberate the land. That's the language. And I believe that not one more settlement should be built until the Palestinians are also given rights to build on their own land. The present situation is the Palestinians who live in this area of the West Bank / Judean Samaria called Area C, they don't have the right to build even on their own private land. And I can't see how we Jews can accept that situation, that we're allowed to build and not allowed to build. We can build schools and we can build clinics and we can build houses, and they cannot build anything, not even in addition to another room to their home. I think that's wrong.
Why is that? What is there must be some kind of thinking behind it that to somebody makes sense. Why are they saying that Palestinians shouldn't even on their own land be allowed to build?
So there's the technical bureaucratic reason. In order to build in any civilized country in the world, you need a building permit. In order for there to be a building permit, there has to be a master plan for the land, what it's zoned as, what is supposed to be built in this area, and then you submit your building permit application to the local government, and they see if what you're planning fits with the zoning and fits with the overall picture of what's supposed to be, and they give you the permit if you meet the conditions. The situation here is that there's no master plans in the Palestinian areas. Therefore, building permits that are submitted, the statistics are that between 98 and 99% are rejected. Why? Because they don't fit with the building plan, because there is no building plan. So then you ask, well, why is there no master building plan? So, because the bureaucracy has not gotten around to creating it. Why not? Well, it's been 40, 50 years. Why is no master plan? So in some cases, you hear the excuse that the Palestinians don't want to cooperate with the military authorities in creating the plan. Therefore, there's no plan. Therefore, there's no building permits. I believe that's an excuse. And what's really happening is the following. There is a Israeli underlying attitude. It may not be a plan, but there's an attitude that the land is ours and it's not theirs. That we belong and they don't. We have one state in the world, and they have Lebanon, they have Syria, they have Saudi Arabia. They can go someplace else. Why do they have to take our little tiny land? So we use these bureaucratic measures to prevent them from building houses, so eventually they'll leave. Again, I really don't know if there's a specific plan written like that, if it's conscious, but it's certainly unconscious. I'll tell you the story here in Alon Shvut. We have a Palestinian village. If I said Rami Levi, a 20-minute walk, I have a Palestinian village 10 minutes from my house walking the other direction. There's about 600 people live there. They live in hovels, terrible conditions, even though most of them work for the local Jews. And the reason they live in terrible conditions is because they're not allowed to build. Every time they try to build, the administration just comes in, military administration, destroy the houses. Now, why isn't there a master plan? Because about 20 years ago, the military administration itself suggested a master plan, but the local Jewish government vetoed it. They said, no, we don't want them building around here. It's too dangerous. It's a Jewish area. You give Palestinians the right to build. They'll bring their uncle and their cousin. They'll build big houses, and they'll shoot at us from there. So it was shot down, the master plan. And until this very day, there's no master plan, and the Palestinians can't build. They have nothing to do with their money. And the result is that the village isn't growing, and young people leave because there's no houses. And the people, the Palestinian cultures that generations live together and the kids live together, they can't there. So the culture is being destroyed. And many people say that's wonderful. They'll eventually leave. Good for them. It's our land, it's not theirs. And again, there is, I criticize it deeply, but I also understand where that attitude is coming from. We really don't have any other state, right? And it really is a very small place. We really feel this is ours for 3,000 years. And there really is fear of the Palestinians getting too strong and shooting at us. I understand all that. But we are behaving in a morally reprehensible fashion, to me it seems. And it's only going to come back and bite us in the foot, because we're creating more resentment and more hate and more of a sense that you can't trust those Jews. You can't rely on those Jews. The Palestinians are saying to themselves, we work for those Jews. We're friends in work, but look, they won't let us build houses. What type of people are that? Are those that don't let you build on your own land? It creates bitterness and hate. And hate it kills.
Well, let's talk about something positive. Let's talk about Roots and your work with Roots and your work to try to bring understanding to both sides. You have many different programs there. Can you talk about your various groups?
So Roots is the local Israeli-Palestinian initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. We bring the two sides together, Israelis and Palestinians locally. People live right near each other, but completely separate. Different towns and villages, different languages, different transportation systems, different medical systems, education, everything is separate, and there's no place to meet. Other than Rami Levi, which I said is new, there's no place Israelis and Palestinians could meet. And even in Rami Levi, it's a Jewish place. Palestinians who go there are only the upper class that have gone beyond the fear of most Palestinians. Most Palestinians wouldn't go into Rami Levi. They just wouldn't go there. So there's no place to meet. Roots created a place to meet. We created the only Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank, in all of Judea and Samaria. It's called the Dignity Center. And there the two sides can meet. We have a patio, we have a field, we have bathrooms, classroom, kitchen. And it's a Garden of Eden. It's an oasis. It's a place of really reconciliation and equality and dignity where both sides can meet. So in addition to just casual meetings, we have many, many, many different programs. I'll talk about our youth group. We have, before the pandemic, it hasn't yet started up again, we have a little kids group, kids ages of 5 to 10, meeting every other week. My grandchildren were part of that. We have a middle school program, photography workshops for kids from the ages of 11 to 14, 15. And then we have our high school kids, ages 15 to 18, who meet every other week during the course of the whole school year and really, really get to know each other and get to listen to the other side's narrative and be scandalized and be upset and be challenged and unsettled. And that's the way you grow. In addition to that, we also have a program for our alumni. We have about 120 alumni of the youth program, people between the ages of 18 and 24 at this point, 18 and 25. They meet infrequently, but they meet. And that's really important to keep the flame going, the flame of what they learned and experienced during the high school program. In addition to that, we have two different faith dialogue groups, one Jews and Christians, another Jews and Muslims. We have religious celebrations together, like now we're celebrating Ramadan, the Muslim holy month. Every week during Ramadan, Roots holds an iftar, which is a break-fast meal. The Muslims are fasting every day and eating when the sun goes down. So once a week, we have a break-fast meal when the sun goes down. We've had between 60 and 80 people at the 3 events we've had so far. The 4th and last one is tomorrow night. And it's really, it's just a wonderful thing. It's a liberating thing to be able to go beyond your bubble and talk to the other side as a human being, as if it's natural. To talk to for a Jew and a Palestinian, talk as if it's natural. It's not natural around here, but we make it natural. To hear their pain and their suffering, hear their perspective, hear their narrative, hear about their lives, hear about their aspirations on both sides. We pray together, we eat together, we study together, we talk together, and we have a good time together. And I ultimately believe that human contact is the key to a better future, of destroying those exclusive narratives, the prejudices and the fears, creating empathy and trust. In addition to that, we have photography workshops every summer for women. We have lectures on religious topics. We have language study, learning the other side's language. We have a music therapy group that's just beginning again after Ramadan, after a year and a quarter on break. And that's in our center in Gush Etzion. Gush Etzion is the area between Bethlehem and Hebron, south of Jerusalem, near my home. But we also have a Roots Center in the Jordan Valley, where we have some of these same programs on a smaller level. We also have a newer center between Ramallah and Nablus in the north, what we just called Samaria. They're small, but it's also growing. And we have a tiny, tiny, tiny seed that's growing in the Hebron Hills, south of the city of Hebron. Now, that's everything I said is on the level of people-to-people contact, but we do more than people-to-people contact. I forgot to say the summer camp, the sleepaway camp, the day camp, but beyond the people-to-people stuff, we also engage in activism, which means trying to directly act in this imbalance of power in which we live. If a mosque is torched by Jewish radicals, we come and fix it up the next day. If a synagogue is torched, we come and say, this is not the Palestinian people. If an olive grove of Palestinians is destroyed, there the next day. And when Palestinian houses are destroyed by the military, we also come and we say, we're sorry this had to happen. And we have more than one member, Palestinian members, who've had their houses destroyed. And of course, when there are attacks, one side against the other, we try to get involved somehow to lower the flames of hatred. We had a case of 3 years ago, in which a Palestinian boy was shot by the Israeli army and killed. And it was clear that it was a mistake. The army held the boy's body for many, many, many weeks. It's part of the Israeli government policy. And we lobbied the government to return the body. And we were successful there. There are Palestinian villages without water. There are Palestinian villages who have the entrance closed by the army. We tried to lobby to relieve some of the suffering.
Wow. you also speak, and you have a program with the pre-army academies.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, we speak to groups that come to our center. There are groups that come from around the world, primarily from America, and primarily Jewish, but not only. And there are groups in Israel. So in Israel, I'd say 80% of the groups that come are from Israeli gap year programs. Kids finish high school, they have to go to the army. But between high school and the army, something like 4,000 Israeli kids every year go into one of these gap year programs. And a lot of the gap year programs bring their students to us for a 3-hour, 2-hour seminar, which they simply hear an Israeli talking. It might be me, it might be my partner Shaul, and they hear a Palestinian talking. It might be my partner Noor, my partner Khalid. And for 99% of them, this is the first time they ever met a Palestinian. For 80% of them, it's the first time they ever met a settler. And to meet the two together, talking about empathy and understanding and acceptance and recognition is mind-boggling. And I think that many of them really undergo a mini transformation.
That's very cool. You recently had a run that you did?
We recently had our second Roots Run for Reconciliation. About 35 people ran a 9.5 kilometer course to raise money for Roots. At the end of it, we had a very nice ceremony in which both Israelis and Palestinians participated, in which we talked about Roots, had refreshments, listened to a little bit of music. And our third Run for Reconciliation is Sunday, October 16th.
Oh,
so take the date. October 16th. I think that it's the 16th, unless Sunday's the 17th, but I think it's the 16th, October.
Okay, it's a Sunday, huh? Okay.
And just like the first two runs, so the same thing with the third one, though, be in October, we invite people from around the world to do two things. One is to donate money for the run. We raised $50,000 in the past run. But secondly, not just to donate, but to run themselves around the world the same day that we're running, and to get people to sponsor them. Again, to raise money for Roots. So take out your running shoes, begin practicing. You have now 6 months to get in shape.
I only wish I ran 8 marathons, but my feet paid the price. I miss it so much. We recently went to a running store to buy some new shoes, and all the memories came back. I really wish I could.
Wait a second. You ran 8 full marathons, really?
I used to be in a marathon training group and on the board of directors for a group called LA Leggers. And we met in Santa Monica. There were 4 real marathons, but 3 weeks before the actual race, we would do the distance. So I've done it 8 times. But, you know, during my 30s, that was my life. Friends were there. We, you know, ran. We had lectures, all about running. And it was, it's affiliated with the LA Marathon, Orthopedic Hospital, and KNX Radio.
So if you still have some of those connections, perhaps you can get them involved to run in our next race and get sponsors.
I don't know who's there, but I could always make a call. It was a very good time, a very good part of my life. I'm sure since you're running that you recognize the benefits and the fun that can be associated with it.
Actually, I can tell you parenthetically, I don't. I've been running since 15, but I actually don't really enjoy it.
Well, once you get the endorphins going, then, I joke now because my feet are goofed up that I do the Orange Theory Fitness, which is here, which is It's the only thing that I can compare to the effects of running. But I always joke that by the end of class, you have the endorphins going. So you're too much in la la land to remember that really should cancel the class because it's too difficult. So you go to the next one again. But it's a healthy, fun time. What would you say with all of this piecework that you learned that, well, I know there's been so many surprises, but what, give us a couple things that you learned that you didn't know before, but today you really value having learned it.
That's so hard for me to answer because I've learned so much and it's all become so natural. I've learned that Palestinians are human beings. I've learned about their story. I've learned about their families. I've learned about their way of life. I've learned not to be afraid of them. That's so important. Let me tell you a story about that.
Okay.
So going back 6 years ago, I think only less than a year after I'd been involved in Roots, I was at our center, the Roots Center, and I needed a ride home. And a Palestinian and his friend said, I'll give you a ride home. So these two Palestinians sat in front and I sat in the back and we started to drive. And within a few seconds, like 10 seconds of driving, I started to laugh. And they asked me, why are you laughing? And this is what I told them. I said, look, I'm now in a Palestinian car with Palestinian license plates, with a Palestinian driver and a Palestinian sitting next to the driver. In my wildest dreams, I would never, ever imagine being in this situation, except if I'm being kidnapped. And it's so crazy that I'm sitting in the car and I'm not being kidnapped. And I'm not afraid. How could that be? I learned to sit in a Palestinian car and not be afraid.
Wow. Wow. So for your last question, if you were speaking to the people of the world, what would the message be that you'd want them to know about your work on peace with Roots, with the Palestinians and in your Israeli community?
I'd want people, I'd say like this, if you are pro-Israeli, that's good. Stay like that. If you're pro-Palestinian, that's good. Stay like that. But don't be only pro-Israeli or only pro-Palestinian. We in Roots want you to be strongly pro-Israel and strongly pro-Palestine at the same time. Because, and this goes back to the hubris of exclusivity, if you're only supporting one side, then you're willy-nilly supporting conflict. What we need is people around the world who love Palestinians and love Israelis and see their legitimacy on both sides and want both sides to live together. So support Israel strongly, support Palestine strongly. That's the way to support a better future.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rabbi Hanan, for sharing your knowledge with us and for working so hard on peace. Next week on October 5th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, our guest on Peace with Penny will be Elizabeth Arif-Fear. She is founder and director of the human rights and interfaith organization Voice of Salam, a member and local co-chair of the Jewish Muslim Women's Network Nisa Nashim, and part of the steering committee of the UK Friends of the Bereaved Families Forum. She is also an official friend of a London-based synagogue and has several years' previous experience volunteering on interfaith and social action projects at a centrally based London synagogue. Elizabeth has written for a range of organizations and publications, including Haaretz and Jewish News, and as a published poet, has focused on a range of human rights and faith-based issues, including Jewish-Muslim relations. In 2019, she won the St. Ethelburga's Award for Sacred Activist of the Year, and in 2020 was selected onto the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations UNAOC Fellowship Program. We hope you will join Liz and I on October 5th at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. You can get the Zoom link on www.pennystee.com, my Facebook page, or at the end of this clip. Please register. If you have a scheduling conflict, you can always see the recordings on my website at pennystee.com under podcasts. Thank you, and may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.